tell us how was that experience?
Hi everybody. Thank you so much for invitation to this amazing symposium. I have to say, like from the start, just echoing voices of many people who were talking today, that 20 years ago, the issue of oceans weren't really so amplified, and I felt it, and now I kind of feel I finally found my tribe. So thank you very much for being here. Right, there's lots of coordination happening here because I have my notes on my mobile. I'm not Instagramming. I also have notes from today's sessions. So bear with me. I need to organize myself. Right. Okay. So when you look at me, when you see me looking at my phone, I'm not checking Twitter. I'm just looking at my notes. Otherwise, I would be talking till tomorrow. Anyway, I'm very self-conscious as well to talk right now after so many amazing presentations from so many people and so many disciplines. And it's end of the day as well, and I hope that, well, thank you very much for sticking with us. I hope that you had a good day and you're not too tired. So the title of my presentation is How to Fall for the Sea, and the how to part has been recently a big part of all titles of my kind of latest work. And I think I was talking to Tatiana and Helena recently, and I think this how to became that I got annoyed with all these speculative what-if questions. I'm fed up with speculations. I need instructions now. I think that we all need instructions. So I realized that throughout my practice, I've been trying to convey my deep love to the sea and create a sort of space for other people to fall in love with the sea. I don't know if I've been successful or not, but let me describe a few projects. Yes, I try not to get labeled. I'm kind of all over the place. I very often also talk about myself as the master of none and serial beginner because each single project is totally different. I work with natural entities, and I think underlying kind of theme in my practice is the idea of conveying the concept of interconnectedness, which I know have been present in so many other presentations today. The way how we are interconnected to sea, to nature, to non-human or more than human beings, and we cannot function, as the kind of individual entity. We are kind of all one, as Jose Luis, you were talking about this beautiful idea of the planet as the organism, and it's so, I don't know, it just touched my heart very, very deeply. And special attention in my work is paid towards the oceans because, so it's me and my dad on the merchant navy vessel. I was, I think, around 7 here. I grew up on merchant navy vessels, traveling with my sailor father, and I have been boat school. There is one reason why it happened to me, because it's very unusual upbringing. Basically, I was born in Poland, which was a communist country during this time, and normally people weren't allowed to travel so much, especially to stinking west. But I was born with a morbid case of asthma, and I had a very clever doctor who said that I have to be on the open ocean in order to survive. And my dad was a sailor. Somehow my parents managed to get the permission for me to travel with him. And so I grew up in between America, Africa, and Europe in the open ocean. And so open sea, being aboard that huge industrial boats and big industrial harbors, it's a home. It's a home to me. And when I was with my dad in the middle of the ocean, I have felt the most connected to absolutely everything, because water was a strongest link between continents and lands and biomes and cultures and nations. And in fact, as when I was growing up, I didn't really have a concept of borders, like, for example, national borders didn't really exist to me because everything was one. And the ocean was always like a sort of blood in the body, flowing everywhere, hydrating, nourishing, connecting and cleansing, and all the species in the water were part of it, part of that beautiful layer of this planet, which we called life, doing their job to make sure that this whole system somehow functioned. So when I was a kid, I kind of felt that I owned the sea, like when you grew up on the street and you go back to the street right now, you have this sense of ownership. That's how I feel about sea. It's kind of mine. And I know it's very, of course, weird and utopian sensation, but it's something which has been very deeply kind of, embedded in me. Anyway, one of the first work which I have done about the sea was called Oil Compass, and that was created in 2011 in Rotterdam at the V2 Institute for Unstable Media. I was part of a larger initiative called Protei. And Protei, those boats you can see hanging, it was a project initiated by Cesar Harada, who he was living in New Orleans in 2010, and he witnessed, that horrible disaster of Deep Horizon oil spill in the Bay of Mexico. He could, in first kind of hand, he witnessed the devastation to livelihood and to people who were living out of the waters of Mexico Bay, and he kind of, had some kind of idea, how can we control this environment without relying on big oil corporations, whether it's possible to create a system or a devices which we can use to clean up, in the case of fishermen from the Mexico Bay, clean up their back gardens. And oh my God, yesterday I read in The Guardian an article about the health toll those people from this region pay today. So many of them have been diagnosed with cancer, and so many of them, they were trying, to help to clean up those spills from the sea, and I wish that Protei was, it was successful as a project, but I wish it was more successful, so those people could actually use Protei, which was unmanned sailing drone for offshore oil spills cleaning, and it was constructed by a team of designers and engineers put together by Cesar, and it was also released as the open source and open hardware device, which was accessible to make and affordable. I did for it a sort of navigational tool called Oil Compass, where we took data from the biggest oil spills from the past. We also slightly illegally hacked the real-time data of oil tankers and offshore oil rigs. And based on that, we're trying to see whether we can predict when and where the next oil spill would happen, so we could actually send the swarm of Protei. And this project, it can exist as a real project. It has been, I think, introduced as more kind of speculative design type of thing. I have to say that we had a conversation with there was a reaction from the big oil companies, and I think, a lot of that made this project not being available so widely. But gosh, when I read this article yesterday, I really wish the story was different. But also, throughout, when I was struggling to communicate to people how much I love sea, it kind of struck me that, yes, it's very difficult to understand because sea is so big and it's such a, as Timothy Morton would call it, hyper object. It's so difficult to kind of relate to this big blue. And And it's also very difficult to relate to species which live in the sea. You know, it's like, for example, corals, because not only that there are different type of genus, but also they live in the space which is not really habitable for us. Even though our ancestors, I mean, in fact, I really hope that my cousin was a cousin of the coral as well. We all came from the sea. Anyway, I started looking at some kind of ideas. How can I convey that connection to species which are so far away? And for example, I looked at clothing as a way of, well, enhancing the presence and strengthening our relation with them. And so Coral Love Story was inspired by the extremely romantic, but also due to the climate change, extremely tragic way how they make love and how they procreate. I'm sure that you know that corals in general, they can only procreate once a year, and the conditions, they have to be very right. There has to be a moonlight, or you know, the right sort of moonlight. The temperature has to be right. They cannot be tired, and only then they can actually release the spawn and well, make babies. And so, right, it's a movie, so I need to, I think, click, right? Okay, I don't know what's happened to the sound, doesn't matter. So I made the kind of costume which is capable in real time to be connected to 8 scientific stations from Great Barrier Reef, the shape of which is reflected on the back of the costume. Those stations gather data such as temperature, pH, amount of debris in the water, in order to alert of the danger of coral bleaching. And coral bleaching naturally means that corals are dying. And so when the corals are stressed because of, for example, higher temperature or too much debris, they cannot procreate, and so they stop regenerating. And so the costume kind of reacts to all of that. It can react in real time. The dancer here has been interpreting through movement what she could feel, because the costume, thanks to the costume, she can feel the heat and vibration, and people around her could see the wearable becoming transparent, just like corals spitting out algae, which gives them nourishment and color. They also become transparent and they are dying. Yes, I need to say as well that the previous work was done in collaboration with absolutely amazing Sequoia Foundation, which specializes in coral regeneration, and it was exhibited in Hull thanks to the collaboration with the DEEP, which is like the institute which really looks after the marine conservation, and my amazing collaborator, marine biologist Sepp Preisner, became my friend, and he advised me on many other projects afterwards. But anyway, this leads me to another work, which has kind of been really, I think it was the first super personal work to me. How to make an ocean. And this artwork was, I guess, a result of few things compiling together, which I think they kind of all happened at the same time, but also it was culmination of my childhood experience living by the sea. I mean, I live at the moment on the North Sea. And also, it started in 2019 when I lost 3 people. So I experienced, quite deep grief. And during this time, actually, the eco-anxiety, which I know few people already mentioned today, was declared as the valid mental health condition. And then the pandemic has happened as well. So there was another level of anxiety happening. And so, well, I have cried a lot. And when I was crying, I started thinking, how about if I start collecting those tears and see whether I can actually grow algae in them? And so I made special tools to collect tears, because let me tell you, it's not so easy. They are called tear spoons. And then I started wondering, if I start collecting those tears, what sort of algae can I cultivate in them? In fact, can I make a kind of marine ecosystem out of tears? And what is the basic ingredients of the ocean? I was supposed to conduct that research in Ars Electronica in Linz, but of course that wasn't possible because there were lockdowns, so I had to make a whole lab in my own studio. And it kind of, spun into the whole research process of keeping a diary of my diet in order to see whether it has influence on my tears. Instead of, I didn't have any access to any scientific medical labs, so I was using like the aquarium water strips to see whether I can see some sort of correlations. I kept noting the reasons for my own crying, and I was just trying to establish the best way of caring for algae. And then the last element of this work is called Moirologist bot. Moirologist is a term from the past. It described the professional crier. So there were people who were, like in Victorian England, for example, invited to wakes and funerals who started to cry in order to encourage other people to release their emotions. Because I was so, I think, made anxious by my constant consumption of online news, so that the bots which were curating those news to me, they kind of made me very, very anxious. I kind of thought, okay, I need to change this narrative, and I wonder whether I can actually use AI, for example, to create a bot which can help me to then release my emotions. And so, at the moment, the work, so in How to Make an Ocean, a visitor is equipped with a tiny bottle and the tear spoon, and then invited to intimate space, to relax, quiet down, watch and listen to audiovisual performance for 10 minutes, which is provided by the bot. And in this private, peaceful environment, maybe shed some tears. The bot, actually, I forgot to mention, is an AI which in real time reads environmental news stories connected to the ocean. And it is trained, it's trained based on my reactions to those titles, but it kind of makes up its mind about the need of crying, and then gives cues based on that, which are more or less emotional. Anyway, the teardrops are then examined, tested for chemical composition and nutritious value, and their suitability to become marine ecosystems. Because after all, the content of our tears depends on, for example, our diet. It is mixed with the seawater, so it doesn't dry, and then all is sealed, and each teardrop is annotated with date and the reason for crying, and then it becomes a kind of part of the larger pool of mini oceans. And so How to Make an Ocean is my wander through the experience of personal sadness, and whether that sadness can become constructive, whether it can become life-affirming and, in a way, rejuvenating. And it's about finding that very intimate and emotional connection to something so vast and overwhelming as oceans, by perhaps caring for a very small part of it and taking a very small steps. I know that probably you are running out of time, but I just want to quickly tell you about two other projects which I'm working on currently. One is actually inspired by How to Make an Ocean. This is a photo of a beautiful red algae which lives on the North Sea called Polysiphonia elongata. It's very beautiful, kind of magenta, very vibrant. So when I was starting working and researching on How to Make an Ocean, that was the first algae which I kind of wanted to cultivate in my tears, and to my despair, it lost color. So I called my marine biologist friend, and I was like, Seb, what's happening? And he's like, well, clearly you didn't eat enough something which contains potassium or something, you know, and the algae didn't really have anything to eat, hence it just lost color. But that actually inspired me to make a new work called How to Become Wholesome, which is about using lots of like parts of human body, my liquids, salt from the human skin, to see whether I can become a servant and I can feed the oceans through that. And I'm currently starting to collaborate again with my marine biologist Seb, and also looking for a couple of medical professionals to help me figure out how to cater for my own body in order to cater for the sea. And again, I was using lots of chemical strips to try to assess suitability of various liquids to become a marine ecosystem, and made sketches for new tools which would help us to kind of harvest food from the bodies in order to feed marine ecosystem. I also used part of the body skeleton, which I just need to stress I obtained in a very legitimate way. It was donated to me from the very old art school. And together with Seb, we started to wonder whether we could use it to grow corals, because it's a source of calcium. And so, yes, that's the photo of like the first prototype, which was exhibited last year in Amsterdam, where I have like various sources of water which are circulating. And so far, I mean, it's only kind of aquatic plant aquarium, just to see whether it will survive and whether it will thrive. And I have to say that it was really good. And the very last project, which I just started in February, although it has been in me for a long time, and it's something to do with the sea change and Mediterranean Sea, is how to find the soul of the sailor. So the whole project is based on my late dad's diaries, who was a sailor, as you know by now. And I feel that while we talk about seas and our current love for them, in many of these discussions, the perspective of sailors is really missing. And those people are the people who, in a way, are on the front line, so to speak. My father was an officer of merchant navy in Poland, but also a sailor under other flags, as Dennis was mentioning today, among many others, Philippines. And despite being quite an officer, he wasn't being treated very well during this time. He loved sea and nature, and he loved its element, had a huge respect towards it. And it really ached him to see the destruction of the seas and pollutions. And even though he was traveling on these gigantic merchant navy vessels, he loved when the engine was off. So the boat was only drifting, and I think in ideal world he would just be he would just sail on the tall ships. And so a few months ago I was invited by two curators, Regine Debati and Carmen Salas, to contribute to Sea Change exhibition, which I think will happen in Neme, but I'm not sure actually. Mediterranean Sea has been, kind of it's in my heart, because that's where me and my dad hung out a lot on these merchant navy vessels. And so, yeah, he left lots of diaries for a long time, and what I'm planning to do is, they're just kind of prototypes and sketches made with AI using his words. So I am looking at his diaries and also old ship logs from Mediterranean Sea, from all over the world, and trying to see whether I can use things like AI to predict the future of Mediterranean Sea, but told with my late father's words. I have no idea where it's going to take me. You will have to check my website maybe in a year and a half. But I just want to, there is one movie about which I forgot. Oh yes, the black and white drawing is actually made out of the sea salt. One of the ideas which I have is to make animation using a sea salt dried from various places of Mediterranean Sea. I just wanted to leave you with Astrid Neymanis, which I know probably most of you know as well, and with her amazing quote about cycling waters and the fact that, you know, it has been interconnecting us to us and everything else. And yeah, thank you so much.